considering whether the leading candidate for the Republican presidential nomination should be banned from running again.
It seemed like there were at least 7 votes against Colorado.
He is very much lashing back at a lot of the building wave of all these different legal cases.
That D.C. appeals court that had taken up this issue of presidential immunity, the court has denied Trump's argument.
If you read through the 57-page court order, you won't find a single sentence that favors or even slightly sympathizes with Donald Trump's argument.
This is a big win for special counsel Jack Smith and clearly a setback for former President Donald Trump.
They intend to appeal this decision to the U.S. Supreme Court,
which is the legal equivalent of, well, then I want to speak to your manager.
We know former President Trump and his legal team, they are trying to do anything they can to delay.
It's a landmark decision.
I felt pride that law still means something in this country.
The law meant a lot across this week. These are precedents that matter a tremendous amount. As you saw in that kind of, oh, wow, we lived through it, but a lot happened, moments that we just showed you, even on Fox, even out in the culture and many other ways you could measure it with a lot of other things happening in the country, from Super Bowl to the Grammys. These cases matter. Colorado had basically anti-Trump activists and other legal experts arguing that he should be struck from the ballot, basically potentially preventing him ever being elected if he's caught, booted off several states' ballots. And we have more on that big case that ended the week coming up later this hour. But we begin with what actually is probably, best we can tell, the most significant set of legal developments this week, which was Trump's criminal trial, which is now back on for those many plots to overthrow the election results culminating in January 6th. A federal appeals court, that's the highest thing other than the Supreme Court, greenlighting the case again. And this is the Jack Smith trial. This is the multi-pronged effort that we've been documenting in the ways that Donald Trump tried to overturn the 2020 election. You can see in the upper left, starting all the way in early November 2020, lawsuits which were allowed, an elector plot that's since been indicted, the state plots, the Congress plot, the Pence plot, on and on. And the court has now set this precedent for holding someone accountable even if they used to be president, rejecting what were those far-fetched arguments that got so much attention. Donald Trump basically saying he should have permanent immunity, and his lawyers saying that means if a president commits murder of American citizens and abuses power and is out of office afterward, even that isn't prosecutable. Well, what happened this week, the reason why I mention it's a precedent, is no former president has ever gotten in this much legal trouble or been indicted. So this week is where a court, an appeals court at that, knocked out those really bananas arguments by Trump's lawyers and made this precedent that for this case, former President Trump has become citizen Trump, that he will be prosecuted like anyone else if the system deems that the just process. It also dealt with that bonkers immunity claim and said that if Trump were right about that, it would collapse our system of separated powers, placing the president beyond the reaches of all 3 branches and telling him, no, you're wrong. Now, Donald Trump has announced that through his campaign and his lawyers, they will fight this all the way to the Supreme Court. And as you can imagine, with that other case I just mentioned, this court has to decide in both these cases whether first to get involved. They already took that Colorado case. And if they do get involved, what to do. But right now, it is Jack Smith 1, Donald Trump 0, with a brand new precedent saying no one, including a former president, is above the law. I told you this is a special we've been putting together, and boy, do we have special guests to lead us off. Andrew Weissmann is a former prosecutor in the Mueller probe, former FBI general counsel with experience on all these issues, and Dahlia Lithwick, senior editor and legal correspondent for Slate. Welcome to both of you. Andrew, I want to go big picture, which is why I just showed here on The Beat our producers and journalists put together that mash, and it's broader than just legal junkies reacting to these cases. Some Americans, of course, feeling a little like fatigued and hard to keep track of it all. But starting with the D.C. Circuit ruling, what does it tell you that it took the alleged criminality of Donald Trump to get this ruling? And what does it say for American law and accountability?
I love that you're sort of pulling the lens back and thinking about sort of the fatigue also that people could feel. Because sometimes I really think that what happens is we get inured to the day-to-day and sort of focus on sort of the small bore without sort of understanding that the process itself is in many ways the story. I keep on wondering, yes, we want to see criminal accountability, meaning there will be a verdict one way or the other that the public is entitled to. But what I think, if we were to think, 3, 4, 10 years, as you're saying, the historical relevance, I think people will look back on this claim of immunity that you're focusing on as the story. This isn't Trump's lawyers saying it. This is Trump saying it. The leading candidate in the Republican Party saying that I should be, the way I view the presidency and the role of the president is outside of the bounds of the other branches of government, that I literally could kill somebody as president and get away with it, that is an appropriate function for a president of the United States. I think that is the picture. I mean, that is sort of regardless of what would happen in a criminal case. That is where we are in this country. That, to many ways, this is to borrow from Marshall McLuhan. It's the medium is the message, and in some ways, I think it is what we are experiencing in the course of these litigations. That's the message, and it's sort of, I think we tend to forget that because we're so focused on sort of where does that go in the clock? When is he going to have his trial? Yeah. Will it happen before the election? But if you stop to think about what it is that somebody is saying who is running for president, and not just running, but succeeding so far in running for president, I think that's really the story.
Yeah, I appreciate you putting it that way, the heft and substance of that, Andrew. If this wasn't such a big news week, I would pull Mr. McLuhan right out here on screen and have him say, how, you know nothing of my work, and how you became a professor of film, or in this case, perhaps law, is beyond him. But we don't have time for that kind of Annie Hall hijinks. We just don't. Dahlia, same question to you as we review what I think. Again, I understand the skepticism. People say, oh, the news guy, the news anchor, Ari, is telling me it's historic again. But best we can understand it, this D.C. Circuit ruling on accountability this week will be taught for decades to come.
Ari, I think I would probably pick up exactly where Andrew just left off, which is every other institution has had its crack, right? We had an impeachment. We had a massive investigation and report. We've seen, a bunch of criminal cases filed, a bunch of civil cases filed. This, in some sense, is an historic week because this is when it all lands at the doorstep of the Supreme Court and the D.C. Circuit. In some sense, if we believe that institutions held in the last election and that they're holding now, this is the moment where we get to kind of ponder that as lawyers and people who watch the courts. And I think maybe my coda to that story is, this country is so obsessed with the arc of trials, right? Trials are... If you're a country that thinks about rule of law, if you're a country that thinks about accountability in any meaningful way, then this is an historic moment because we're seeing sort of the output of what a system of rule of law looks like. What does this come to? What does this mean? And I think that, and it goes to Andrew's point about time, we're doing this under a shot clock, right? We are obsessed with how many, convictions we can get. Can we get, him knocked off the ballot? And we're doing it through this lens, this very compressed lens of all this needs to happen before next November. And I think that is a really inapt way to look at the story of how trials work and how, the rule of law works. And so I think we're just in this very, very strange, and I agree with you, historic moment where it's kind of the court's turn to step in, and other institutions have done their piece. And the anxiety around whether this can get done in time to print ballots or get done in time to have a felony conviction before an election, that's a little bit ancillary. That's an anxiety we're imposing, and we're very frustrated about that time. But I think that this is how the system works, and we are sort of standing in the midst of it, watching that play out.